Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my usual podcast partner, Tom Laidlaw, the former NHL defenseman, played 11 seasons for the New York Rangers and Los Angeles Kings. This is the Laidlaw and Allen Report. We come to you twice a week to talk about all the ins and outs of hockey, and it's a glorious day today. Lots happening in the world of hockey, and we've brought in, and you know him as Eklund of Hockey Buzz, to talk about one of the biggest events, and I think it caught us by surprise in a season where there's been a lot of surprises. Yesterday, Brian Burke was named president of hockey operations for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and his general manager will be Ron Hextall. And in case you're keeping score at home, that's a combined 51 years of managerial NHL experience that the Penguins have brought in. This is an organization that goes big or it goes home. It went big. Let's talk about. The reason I wanted to have you on today is I really wanted to talk about Ron Hextall.
Yeah,
you know him well from having covered the Flyers, having lived in Philadelphia, having gone to their games. He is known as a guy that knows a lot about talent evaluation. The current Flyers team, which coincidentally is ahead of the Penguins in the standings, is stock full of guys that he drafted. But the criticism of him, as you know, is that he wasn't aggressive enough in bringing those guys up quickly, that he didn't, that he seemed, and I think this is unfair, but that he seemed more concerned about, building a structure for 5 years down the road than winning, kind of right away. And like I said,
Kev froze on there, Ek.
I'll say something about that, Kev, while you're frozen there. The interesting thing about those, and Kevin's right, like the concept here, Kevin, that he was an incredible talent draft. But he basically is as good a pro scout organizer as you can get. Like, he's very good at that. There's no two ways about it. He loved his prospects so much he was afraid to move any of them to help them now. So that became an issue in Philadelphia, where they wanted to, once in a while, you got so many prospects, so many offensive defensemen in the system. We need something to help us now at the trade deadline. He wouldn't do that. He really kind of had a love affair with his prospects. None of that got him fired in Philadelphia. What got him fired in Philadelphia was that he didn't communicate his plan with anyone at all, ever. And to the point where Holmgren, Peter Luco, who was there at the time, these guys were, so frustrated to say, "Oh, we just got to trust Hextall." You would ask him, "What do you think? What's going on?" No, and you often hear people above the GM say, when you're looking for information or whatever, we don't know what's going on." They legitimately didn't know what's going on. His whole method is, let me do my thing. I'm going to do my thing, and his communication skills are really what got him out of Philly, because they were just so frustrated with it. That's really and that's why this story becomes, as you can see, now put that into perspective, what we're doing now. He's now working with Brian Burke, right? This becomes like an incredibly interesting. So, I mean, people can change. Maybe he learned a lot from this experience. Maybe he did. And if that's the case, because my goodness, he's with a great communicator now in Burke, a guy who likes to communicate all the time, right?
So, with Brian Burke, and I think we all think the world of Brian Burke here, right? I mean, he's been very successful as a general manager as well. He's got a great personality, charismatic, all that. But I feel bad saying this, but why Brian Burke? Like, what does he bring to the table that they feel like they need in Pittsburgh?
In my mind, he's well, first of all, you're bringing in Hextall, a former Flyer, and I think with Berkey, you're just bringing. Berkey is incredible with the media and incredible with that. I mean, we really are losing something as hockey fans by Brian Burke becoming the general manager of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Right. What he has done, what he does in the media, what he does on television. I mean, he's the next Don Cherry, and he's better than Don Cherry ever was. He honestly is. His storytelling about things, and just the way he's so honest about stuff in the media, is one of the best insights we've ever had into the way things work behind the scenes. We're losing that now. That is upsetting to me as like a hockey fan, and just in general, just what I mean. That is, I think. But you bring him in, he's a big he's a big name, and like Kevin said, go big or go home, right? This is like he's a big name. This is a big deal, and and I think it's a great buffer because Berkey, above all else, what people don't realize about him is as rough as he is, and Kevin, you know this very well, I'm sure. As rough as he is, as he has this persona, he's a company guy. Burke is a company guy. He will do. He's not one of these guys that says if the owner says it's to be the case, Burke is like the owner. That's how it's going to be. He's not going to fight the owner on anything. That's the way. That's what, at least my experience with Burke. That's how he is.
Yeah, I have heard him tell stories about that too. That when he was in Anaheim, he was told to do, he did it. Yeah,
yeah, and he, it's almost like he gets a tattoo of that organization. Like when he was working for the league, like he would take any measure of criticism to stand up for Gary Bettman.
Yeah,
and I'm sure he didn't always agree with Gary on everything, but he is a very loyal guy. But Tom, I want to ask you this, and we can sort of get into a roundtable about this. It's my contention is that Brian Burke, even though he's a president of hockey operations, not even a general manager, I think he'll actually bring energy to that team. Like I think it does flow down. Like players get excited when you got a blustery guy like Brian Burke who's always got something to say and he's fired up. He's going to talk about, I'm sure, about getting the Penguins a little tougher, make them harder to play against. He's going to talk about winning. He's going to be around. He's going to be a presence. I do think there's something to, having Berkey at the top and sort of, spreading his aura, sometimes bad, but mostly good, down on the team. Will that work? Is that possible? I mean, you were a player.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to recall if I ever changed my attitude because of who the general manager was, or even who the coach was. To me, I hear you, Kevin. I don't necessarily disagree. I'm thinking to myself, if that's what really gets you going, then I think there's something lacking in you as a player. Like you should be wanting to play your best when you're there, and the team should be wanting. It's almost an indictment against the team if that's what they need to get going. I look at, and what I'm surprised by this whole combination more than anything is, again, I'm just purely speculating when I say this, but we actually had Joe, was it Tully we had on, Kev, and we asked him about, are they going to rebuild this team at some point? And he said, well, if they do, then Jimmy Rutherford's gone. Well, next week later, Jimmy Rutherford was gone. Now, I don't know if that was all because of, to me, they need to rebuild that team, and Jimmy Rutherford didn't want to do it. Now, when you've got Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin on the team, and you're going to do a rebuild, I don't know if those things go together or not. You can't trade Sidney Crosby, but you can certainly trade Malkin. And again, like X said with Hextall, his track record is to rebuild teams slowly. He does not have a track record of making a team win now. So why then did you hire Ron Hextall? That makes you believe that if you want to win now, that he's going to do that with all the other guys that are available out there. I do agree with you though with Brian Burke there. That he's, so Hextall doesn't want to talk to the media, doesn't want to talk to anybody. Brian Burke will talk to everybody, right? So he's got that covered. That's why I wonder, what are they doing in Pittsburgh by hiring Ron Hextall? What is the message they're sending? Are they rebuilding or are they trying to win now? And to me, if you're trying to win now, Ron Hextall has no track record of ever doing that.
Well, Kevin, I have a question for you, and not to turn around and it is your show. Sorry to ask the question here, but I have a question for you on Rutherford here. I think you have to look at Rutherford and what happened there, and just see where we are now, to see how we got to where we are. I mean, Rutherford, was it true that he wanted, the rumors out there that he wanted to trade Malkin, that he wanted to do a full thing, and that they just said no, and he basically put his foot down, and that was it?
Well, I think it was all of the above. But before I address that, and I will, I do want to say we need to be clear here that who's in charge. Ron Hextall's not in charge. Brian Burke is in charge. They've gone out of their way to make it known that Hextall reports to Burke and Burke reports to David Morehouse. So the guy who you're saying is the slow builder is not the guy in charge. The guy in charge is the guy who.
But then why hire Ron Hextall? There are other GMs we can hire out there.
Here's what I started to say before I lost my internet. I think this is going to be good for both you, Penguins and for Hextall. I think Hextall comes in and being, he's friends with Mario Lemieux. They know each other from the 87 Canada Cup. I mean, there was a real, several years ago, a long time ago, they had the television cameras caught Lemieux and Hextall talking up during a game. They were sitting side by side, and people said, "Boy, what are they talking about? The old, Patrick Division rivalry." Yeah. And after the game, they were just reminiscing. They were buddies, talking about things. So there is a relationship there, and that Lemieux does like him. But I think the Penguins know that, and also they've said publicly, and I don't have any reason not to trust what Morehouse said. They're trying to win right now. They made it clear they're trying to win right now. He's said that multiple times. But I do think they know that Crosby and Malkin obviously are older. Letang's older. So what's the harm in bringing in a guy who has a great reputation, going back to his days in Los Angeles, of being able to be a good evaluator of talent, to get a lot out of a draft? You look at what the Flyers have gotten out of their draft when Hextall was there and compare that to what the Penguins have gotten out of their draft. There's no comparison. Flyers did a better job of drafting. So you're trying to win now, but you bring in a guy who will at least set a structure up that supposedly will give you talent coming in over time. Like I think it was kind of a shrewd move, because you kind of have the now guy in Burke, and then you have a talent evaluator. And I also think Hextall, and what X said is right on. He's probably learned from his what went on there. But going back to Rutherford, I think what happened to Rutherford was not a single thing. Like, I don't think it was they asked him to do something he didn't want to do, or they wouldn't let him do what he wanted to do. It was all the above. Like, he didn't have a contract. They didn't want to deal with it right away because they still had people that they had sort of laid off, and they didn't like the look of all that. They kind of said, "Do you really want to trade Letang? He's popular there." And, so when it all added up, and I think there is something to.
Yeah. I mean,
go ahead. Jump in there.
Rutherford. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because Rutherford, to me, his whole history in Pittsburgh, Rutherford's whole history in Pittsburgh was at best bizarre. Like, he comes in there really just to be a guy who was supposed to be there for a couple months. Remember, like, how this played out? Like, he was supposed to be there he had retired already. Like, he'd already retired. This is years ago now. I mean, I don't know if you know how many years. He was supposed to be there for a couple months, and then he was there for we'll sign one more year. And then the really interesting thing about Burke and Hextall doing this, it's almost like you can imagine both of them saying, "We won't do this if the other isn't involved," because Hextall needs Burke on the media, like you said. And Burke, I think, after his experience in Toronto, loves the shelter. Because this is what Burke did in Calgary, basically, right? He was the president of Calgary, and there was a GM in Calgary right below him, Trevelig, right? That's the scenario where he's not the guy who's the GM, quote unquote. He gets this shield for you can say the GM doing this, but he also gets to be the face of the franchise. So he's very much repeating what he did. Where in Toronto he was just the GM and everything was on him all the time.
But how's that worked out for him? I mean, listen. I'm not overly impressed by Hextall. I see the draft record. I think Jimmy Rutherford, Kevin's point about the draft not being as good in Pittsburgh because they trade away all their picks all the time to try to keep winning, right?
But Hextall, Tom, has landed players in lower rounds.
Yeah, that's where he's been really good. He is,
he's picked up that's what the Penguins haven't been able to do.
But you know what? Though, I'm going to argue with you there. So the teams he's with have drafted players in lower rounds that have turned out to be players. That's what the scouts do, right? I mean, the scouts go and get it. To me, I have not been overly impressed by Hextall. I don't see he didn't do it all in L.A. That wasn't all his doing. Lombardi was there. He did a lot of that stuff. I think he's respected as a guy that played.
But this Penguin team's in trouble. This Penguins team's in big trouble. And I mean, watching them, last year in the bubble, the way they went down to Montreal, that was bad. That was beyond bad. They went down really like a team that didn't care at all to be involved in this tournament. Like, they really looked, and the way they reacted to even losing was so much like, whatever, weird year kind of thing. This year, I saw them in the first two games of the season against the Flyers. Granted, it was early, and I've never seen a worse defensive team. And just in general, there are some players on that team, I think I might have even texted Tom at one point, that you could play defense on this Penguins team. You got to put your skates on right now because there's Tom right now. I mean, there are some guys on this team that are so slow, look so terrible, and the offense. I mean, this Penguins team, and they were winning some games, but they're in trouble. And shouldn't any of that fall on the coach here too? I mean, do we expect these guys to bring in their own coach at some point?
Yeah, but the problem there is too, though. I mean, he's won a Stanley Cup too. So all of a sudden, does he not know how to coach?
2 Stanley Cups.
Yeah, he's won 2 Stanley Cups. But I'm telling you, that team. I mean, the way if they go down like they go down in the bubble last year, and Burke and Hextall are in charge, Sullivan doesn't stay.
Well, probably good. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know. To me, it's like kind of a confusing message. I mean, again, with the track record of Hextall of being a guy that likes to build slow, and if his drafting is his thing. But then how do you say you want to win now then, right? But I hear you. I almost like why do you need both guys then? If Berkey's the head of hockey operations and he's going to be calling the shots, Hextall has to answer to him. It's almost like they've got Burke is the blustery guy, wants to win now.
There is a tradition of this in Pittsburgh. You go back to
Craig
Patrick. And what Craig Patrick said is I want as many good hockey minds as I can, and he certainly wasn't afraid to hire guys who could replace them. So he hired Scotty Bowman. He brought in Bob Johnson.
Very true.
Herb Brooks was part of the organization later on as well.
I mean, Kevin, you say Berkey's in charge. There's no question about it in your mind that Berkey's in charge, and they're making it known that Berkey's in charge.
Yeah, they've announced
But in Calgary, if I remember right, the way things went in Calgary, whenever a question was asked to Burke on radio, because he goes on, he's not afraid to go on radio. He's on XM all the time. Whenever Burke went on radio in Calgary and there was something happened, he would say, well, that's Brad's job as a GM to bring the players in and make things. He was he was very good at that. And I wonder how much I get the feeling that I believed him. Like I believed him that Brad was doing it and he wasn't running it. Like I believed him so much. Am I wrong to believe him in that? Was he really pulling the strings in the background in Calgary? Will he really be pulling the strings here? Or will he be the kind of guy who's like a company guy to the point where old school hockey, the GM's the GM, the president's the president, the coach is the coach? What is he?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a fair question. And I think that's the only question that's, left unanswered a little bit because Berkey's history is also to be loyal to the process. And the process is what you just laid out. That the GM has to be the GM, the coach has to be the coach. And Berkey will certainly say that's Hextall's call. But we all know Berkey. He's a powerful figure, and he's persuasive. This guy's a Harvard-trained lawyer. Like when there's a private conversation between Hextall and Berkey, he's probably going to get his way. And plus, Hextall knows who.
Oh, you think so? You think so with Hextall? Hextall is just some of the most stubborn people on the planet.
And the other thing, the other fun thing in Philadelphia is Hexy is, he's different as a GM. Like we had Bob Clark and we had Bobby Clark. We would always joke around. They're two different people. Bob Clark, the GM, Bobby Clark, the player. But at their heart, they were still the guy who would slash you when the referee wasn't looking. Like they still had that. Hextall is still the guy who took that yak at Nielsen or runs Chelios into the boards. And he's mad at Philly, and he's on Pittsburgh. He's on Pittsburgh right now. That's something that in Philly, that's like, okay, it's Hexy with a vendetta, and we got to watch out.
Hey, well, maybe you're touching on something there, Ak. Maybe that was part of the reason, right?
I mean, in Philly, that's a very real that's being talked about right now. And and Burke was a Maine Mariner. Anthony Mangione, who does the podcast with us sometimes on Hockey Buzzcast, tweeted out, now you have an ex-Flyer and an ex-Maine Mariner at the time, which were the Flyers too. Worked with, and where Burke was, working against the Flyers in Pittsburgh on their biggest rivalry. So there's a story there that's good. And just to finish the one little thought, Kevin, the only question you asked Tom, which I thought was really interesting. I think having Burke around, I've never played the game. And I know that I think the coach is the most important person to the players, and the GM is probably maybe second, and you would think the team president's third. But I do think that just Berkey is a guy's guy who shows up in the locker room and says, this is BS or whatever. He's just gonna be completely. Players do relate to him. They do like him. He's hard not to like.
Yeah, on his teams in the past, like he has like rules that he lays out that if you're going to do an interview, you got to say 2 good things about someone else.
Right.
Really,
yeah, I had the most. I mean, you have to listen to a podcast. There's another podcast out there. I wish I knew what it was. I'd get it to you guys. Where Burke came on recently. Jonathan Davis and the guy Puckpedia on the internet did a great interview with Burke. One of the best interviews I've ever heard with him. And it was like a half hour long, and it was recent. Burke knows. We just got a real insight into him. Like he knows everything. He knew, for example, that he's like when I was in Toronto, I would have played more games out there all the time because it was $30,000 to fly the team from Toronto to Pittsburgh from Toronto to Vancouver. Every time we flew out, $30,000 there, $30,000 back every time. It's that kind of detail that Burke just has like in his head.
Well, and just to give the folks sort of an insight into his personality, I just did the book with Mike Emmerich, and when Mike Emmerich was the broadcaster for the Maine Mariners, Burke was on the team, and he was doing an interview between periods. He was actually not playing in that game, and a brawl broke out but between periods at the end of the period, and Burke left the interview. He said, "Mike, I got to go because my teammates need me." And walked out of the interview and then went down along the ice level in case they needed him. I think that's the kind of loyalty that he brings. Like when you say he's a guy's guy, he's the player's manager too. Like he's going to walk into that room, and when a guy makes a big hit, and he's going to go up to that guy and say, "Oh, I love that hit you laid out today." Like,
and he remembers everything that ever happened with every player he's ever had. And he said, you've heard that, I'm sure. Like, when I saw him for a while, like when I was talking to him one time at the All-Star game, and he was the GM of the Anaheim Ducks, and Homer was the GM of the Flyers. He would I had lunch with him, and he said, make sure you tell Homer that I won that fight back then. Like they had a fight at some point along the lines. Like, make sure you tell Homer I won that fight. And the next time I saw him, and I was just like one of those joking things, and I never said anything to Holmgren or whatever. Next time I saw him, it's like, I talked to Homer, and you didn't tell him that I won that fight. I'm like, this was like a year. This was like a year later, and then and 2 years after that, he's like, yeah, there's the guy who wouldn't tell Homer that I won that fight. It's just
hey, let me ask you a question. Let's get away from Pittsburgh for a second. There, you're in Philadelphia, so I know everybody talks about how great Philadelphia is as a team, and their record shows that they're playing well. I watched them, and it just for some reason I just am not as in love with them. Well, obviously, being a former Ranger, that's part of the problem. But I don't see the talent as much as everybody else seems to see.
It's so funny, Tom. There is this weird thing, and even watching them, even being really close to the situation and seeing them live, which I've gotten to do this year, which is really interesting. Which is totally bizarre. To be there as one of like 20 people in the building. There is something wrong with them, and no one can, or there's nothing wrong with them. And this is and it's weird to say this. Like, I'm trying to put my finger on it forever to what people are seeing. The problem is that Giroux and Voracek in the older school, at this point you want to say, Van Riemsdyk, you want to say though they're on the backside of their career, and the Farabees and Morgan Frost and these guys are the ones this is their team. But Giroux and Voracek and Van Riemsdyk are still good, not good enough, not as good as they once were, but not bad enough to say that they're on the downside of their career. So they're in a weird spot, and you can't the rookies are good enough to be like, those rookies are impressive, but not so good that they're like obviously going to take over everything. So there's a weird, you can't put your fingers around what they are, and the Carter Hart is a really good young goalie, but he's still obviously young and makes mistakes. The coaching here is okay, but at times Vigneault, Therrien can't get the power play going, and Vigneault just messes with the lines too much and confuses everybody. And it's just the defense is all offensive minded defensemen because they didn't have that forever. So they've got 6 guys now that basically look like Shane Gostisbehere at times, with the exception of, Provorov, who's obviously a superstar. There are so many things that it's impossible to put your finger on what's going on in Philly. But the funny thing is they keep winning games, and they're in games they shouldn't be, which is, to me, the other night I left. I had an issue with my son, and I was at the Flyers-Bruins game. The first of the two, where the Flyers lost in overtime, where the Bruins had this incredible comeback at the end. And I left that. I never leave a game early, but my son needed help at home. With my wife needed help. I left the Flyers up 3-1, and I said to Russ Cohen, who's in the press box with me too, I'm like, for all we say about the Flyers, the fact that they're winning, that they're beating the Bruins right now 3-1, is like tells you something. Like, they shouldn't be winning this game at all. This is good teams find ways to win games they shouldn't win. Maybe they are a good team. And of course, the rest of the history, as I come back on the way home, I hear the Bruins score 2 goals and win in overtime on the drive home.
Yeah,
that pretty much sums up the Flyers. It's like, what what are they? Like, they shouldn't have been in that game at all, but they were. They shouldn't have beaten Washington the other night, but they did. I think they're better than we think, but I think the problem is the problem everyone's having is they're not easy to define, and we all want to define teams in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Eck, we appreciate having you on today to talk about Hextall, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. And I'm sure as we move along in the season, we'll have you back to talk about.
Well, I very much appreciate it, of course, guys, and I'm really excited to be bringing this podcast to Hockey Buzz. I'm really looking forward to this podcast being a part of the Hockey Buzz lineup. We have a little placard being made for you guys and everything like that. So shortly, you guys will be able to watch this podcast in your normal places, but also on Hockey Buzz when it goes on, which is going to be, to me, it's just an awesome thrill to have you guys be a part of that. Thanks.
Hey, so everybody knows too that's watching. This man is legendary, Eklund. You go back to the lockout 04, 05. He was this mystery guy down in Philadelphia. Nobody could figure out who he was. He had all the scoops. Everybody was all the rumors, the accurate rumors were going on about the lockout. And I emailed him, and that's how we became friends after that. So great to see you.
Two of my greatest thrills in life are the two emails I got from the two guys that are in this podcast with me. That's just like, when you email me, Tom, I'm like, holy cow, that's a Ranger guy I grew up watching. My parents had season tickets from 1980 on, so I was like, I watched Tom play, and then for Kevin Allen, who I read every single day, to email me out of the blue, I thought someone was punking me both times. I thought someone's punking me. This isn't really Kevin, this isn't really Tom. I made you guys talk to me on the phone. I said, I got to, at the time. And now to have gotten to know you guys as friends and gotten to work with you guys, it's, that's just the greatest thing in the world. So thanks. I can't thank you enough.
Great to see you.
All right. Thanks again, Nick. Have a good day.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Tom, I think we uncovered something here in the interview with Eklund. So, we look back now at your thoughts on the East Division starting out. What we know is you thought from the beginning, and it's turned out accurately, that the Penguins were going to be in trouble.
Right. So Kevin's freezing up us here again. So I think we're going to be talking about like the teams that we predicted that would do pretty well. Go ahead, Kevin. Jump in there.
And then you think Barry Trotz is overrated, and you were a big anti-Ovechkin guy for the longest time, although you have come around on him.
Yeah.
So let me list those teams: Penguins, Capitals, Flyers, Islanders. What do we know about those four teams, Tom? Could they have been the teams that you played the most when you were playing in New York?
I think there's a little hidden animosity there. Is that what you're saying?
I think we've unearthed the key to how you feel about those teams.
You know what? What's funny? I never would have thought of that, but I got to be honest. When I find when I'm speaking about them that it's hard to say something nice about them, right?
Yeah. Although I say all that, I mean, I'm ribbing you about it, but your analysis of all of their issues was right on. I mean, before Ovechkin was the guy that we like now, he wasn't the guy that we like now. I mean, he had issues, and even though I was a big supporter of him, I recognized that he needed to do more and so forth. So, I mean, just for the final thing on the Penguins hire, what I didn't ask you that I wanted to is that, like, who would you have hired? I mean, you clearly don't like this, but who do you thought would have been a better fit for them?
Yeah, you know what? Great point. I don't know who would have been better. I mean, obviously he wasn't going to go back there, but I thought Ray Shero had done a fantastic job, but he's already been there and gone, so they're not going to bring him back. I guess there is no name that jumps out at me there. Where's Dean Lombardi, for example? I guess that's one name that. But he doesn't seem to pop up on the radar for anybody.
No, but I wonder if his style too is, he's a pretty autonomous guy too. Like, if you going to criticize, I mean, Dean's a great communicator. But I could see Dean just wanting to do it his way and not have to, deal with explaining himself to upper management every 36 hours.
Right. But I guess that's difficult, especially when Mario Lemieux is part of your upper management team, to say that.
But here's the weird thing about that. Like, Mario's not the kind of guy that's going to call you every 72 hours. Like, I bet Jim Rutherford didn't have more than, other than in passing. How many times do you think Jim Rutherford and Mario talked about the team? I bet it wasn't very often. Now, Dave Morehouse, the president, I'm sure, was constantly talking to Jim.
Right. I guess the thing with Pittsburgh, it was such a shock to me, the combination, right? I mean, the two guys, I'm assuming they know each other, Burke and Hextall, right? They've obviously met each other, but it's not like they've got some relationship there that they wanted to say,
I think they know each other better than that.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I do. I can't tell you why I believe that, but Hextall and Burke know each other.
So how do you think it went down then? Do you think they hired Burke first? And then he was one that said,
I think they had it in their head that they wanted to bring in Burke, and maybe Burke said, like, I think X onto something about how Burke likes the director of hockey operations, because then he can, he's free to sort of navigate and do his thing and be Brian Burke. And
the general managers nowadays, although with the pandemic it's different, they do a lot of scouting too. I mean, they are out all the time. Maybe he just doesn't want to do that, right? He's more comfortable taking the office job more. Media. Yeah, I'd be interested to see how it all went down. Like the dynamic there, and you touched on it before. It's not the first time in Pittsburgh. When you go way back to Herb Brooks, Craig Patrick, Scotty Bowman, Bob Johnson. Now the dynamic there at Pittsburgh, it's Mary Lemieux, Brian Burke, like big personalities, right? Ron Hextall, big personalities. It's not like these, people that are wallflowers, right? So, interesting. I just, again, my thing is, if I'm Sidney Crosby, I'm sitting there saying, and I'm sure they've talked to Sid, but I'm sure I'm sitting there saying, okay, I've been here and I've done a lot. What are we doing now? Are we rebuilding? And maybe he'd be fine with that. Maybe.
No, I think Sid, first of all, let's not forget that Sid and Mario are friends. Like Sid lived with Mario for 5-6 years. Yeah. He knows what's going on. And call me old fashioned, but I take people at their word. And when Dave Morehouse says publicly, we're not rebuilding, I don't have any reason not to believe him. Like,
okay. All right.
So
I take that at face value, but then why not? I mean, how do you think what do you have to, think you're going to win?
I think they feel.
So Kev's frozen again. So when I look at that lineup, I start with the goaltending. I said, do they have goaltending that says, okay, is it the old Marc-Andre Fleury when he was at his best? Do they have that kind of goaltending? Is who they have for defensemen now? Letang's getting older. Malkin's getting older as well.
Yeah. But I think they're in the Devils mold for a different reason. The Devils were a great defensive team, and the Penguins are an offensive team. But where they think if we get in the playoffs, which is iffy, I think the Penguins knew that coming in, that it was going to be a hard fight. They might have a chance. For the first time in a long time, and maybe ever, I think they got enough wingers for both Malkin and Crosby. Usually they were one short, but now they've got Kapanen, they got Gunsel, they've got Zucker. Rust is playing amazingly well. So that's enough guys finally to do it. The only problem is Malkin's not playing well.
Right.
So now that to me, that is the biggest part of all this.
Right.
Should they be panicked about Malkin, or should they just be patient and say, he's just off to a slow start? Because boy, he has not looked good.
Right. It's now he's older too, right? And again, I hear you when you say, well, all we need to do is get in the playoffs. But how did that work out last year with Montreal?
But they looked really stale. I'm not denying that. Yeah. And it was worrisome, but they've made some changes. They shook it up a little bit. And they did a lot of the things that you've talked about that they do, except they didn't get rid of Mike Sullivan, but they got rid of assistant coaches and they, changed.
Yeah, that's odd too. Like, why do you get rid of the assistant coaches? What does that do for you? I don't.
I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to me when they if there's a guy in charge of the power play and the power play is bad for 2 years, then it makes some sense. Bringing a guy who's known as a good power play coach. But
that is true.
But that was, I think that's part of the reason why that Rutherford made it clear that he didn't enjoy having to get rid of a lot of people he liked. And I did think there was, probably if you're reading the tea leaves, there was some discussion from management about, we need to do something because we need to send a message to our fan base that, we're not going to,
Right.
tolerate
mediocrity. I listen. And like you, if they say they're not rebuilding, then I take them at their word. But I mean, I think that's a mistake. I think they need to rebuild. That's a team that needs to rebuild.
Well, they're going to try to do
that hovering team there, right? They're hovering to just make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Right? Well, those teams, they don't survive.
They're trying to do it the hard way. If you're going to rebuild, you rebuild the way that Toronto did. You strip it down right to the chassis, and then you rebuild. And trying to change on the fly is a really difficult. The Kings are trying to do that.
Right. The Rangers have done it. Boston did it years ago. But see, to me, Boston was smart. They kept Tuukka Rask. They kept Patrice Bergeron, Zdeno Chara. So they get that core group of guys that are the culture of the team. And then they strip away the rest of the stuff and bring in new players, right? So I mean, that worked.
Yeah. I mean, the Blackhawks did it a couple of times. They won a cup. Stan Bowman, they kept all the guys, and then he changed everybody around them, and they won again.
Well, you're right. But a little different in that, they were forced to for salary cap reasons, first of all, right? It wasn't like really a rebuild, but they, but I mean, the core guys, particularly Kane and Taves and those guys, they're younger players too. I don't know. I just look and I say, like, I think Nashville's in the same place. I think San Jose's in the same position. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're hovering there. You're not improving. Your guys are getting older. At some point, you need to pull the trigger on a rebuild. Say, listen, this group just isn't working. Either they're too old or it's the wrong mix of people. There's different reasons there. Like for me, we've talked about Nashville so many times. To me, it's just the wrong mix. They just don't have the right mix of people. So.
Well, sometimes you have no options, though. What the Blackhawks going to do? They can't get rid of Seabrook and Duncan Keith.
Yeah. Well, you can still get a ton for Kane, right? But I mean, you're not going to trade him. What's the point?
Yeah, right? He's the one guy. Now, speaking of that, I did, and we're really running late on this, but I got to get your thoughts on it because, you and I were both wrong on Boston. It felt like they were taking a step back, and they haven't been.
Particularly after the Chara. Yep.
Yeah, and I think we were wrong in Chicago too.
Oh, totally wrong in Chicago. Yeah, it's not even close on Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah, they're playing well. They're in third place and they're.
All right, so we're gonna get Kevin. We're gonna get another squirrel there running around in the cage there for Kevin.
Yeah, I'm having all sorts of problems this morning. All right, well, we've probably run too long anyway, but we appreciate everyone tuning in. You can catch me also on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4:00 on hockeydebates.com. I do a podcast with Bob Duff, and I write for Eklund's Hockey Buzz site. And Tom, tell everybody where to find
the radio version of this show on radio.co at 365 Sports. Again, that's radio.co at 365 Sports. You can get the radio version right there. You can listen to Kevin and I all day long. Just keep listening to us.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Great to see you.